We need a theme song, so could you please send me a theme song? 'Cause we don't really have a theme song, and we could really use a theme song. Send us a song. I welcome you wherever you may sit from my home that sits on Treaty 8 land, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree and Dene. This territory is home to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. I thank the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who have lived in and cared for these lands for generations. Tremendously grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today and those who have gone before us. I make this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory I reside on.
Hi, everybody. It's me, Alyssa. I'm very excited to have managed to log on today. I missed last week. I do apologize. Mostly to myself. So yeah, I just wanted to pop on really quickly because I've been really excited about what's going to happen in November. So in November, every Friday at 8, what you are going to hear is not so much a variety of things. I know that we had a couple things pending, like some more of the reading of the Two Noble Kinsmen, which will return to in December. Or maybe all of my November imaginings will be a big, I don't want to say failure. I want to say successful experiment in what I will not accomplish. I don't know. But anyway, some of you may know about Nanowrimo. So Nanowrimo is the National Novel Writing month, and it's done in the month of November. And the kind of goal is, I mean, you can set your own goal, but the goal is to write a novel in the month of November. So you write every day. What the NaNoWriMo goal is 50,000 words. So a 50,000 word novel within a month. I have been dying to write a novel. I've really, really wanted to, and I struggle a lot committing myself to that. Part of what I really struggle with is that as soon as I start, I decide that it's crap. I decide that it's not worth anybody's time to read. It's not worth my time to write. And I came upon, this is a couple years ago, came upon a quote from Ira Glass, who's a wonderful, wonderful writer. And I'm just going to read it out to you really quickly. I just gotta find it here. So what he said was, nobody tells this to people who are beginners. I wish someone told me. All of us who do creative work, we get into it because we have good taste. But there is this gap. For the first couple years, you make stuff, it's just not that good. It's trying to be good. It has potential, but it's not. But your taste, the thing that got you into the game, is still killer. And your taste is why your work disappoints you. A lot of people never get past this phase. They quit. Most people I know who do interesting creative work went through years of this. We know our work doesn't have this special thing that we want it to have. We all go through this. And if you were just starting out or you were still in this phase, you've got to know it's normal. And the most important thing you can do is a lot of work. Put yourself on a deadline so that every week you will finish one story. It is only by going through a volume of work that you will close the gap and your work will be as good as your ambitions. And I took longer to figure out how to do this than anyone I've ever met. It's just going to take a while. It's normal to take a while. You've just got to fight your way through. So that's Ira Glass's quote. And so that happens to me all the time when I try and write larger works, which is why most of my writing has been shorter like short stories or poems that I can kind of get a hold of in one sitting. And often, even those I want to come back to again, but then by the time I do, I'm like, it's just not where I want it to be. So I have a goal of just writing a novel. It doesn't have to be good. Nobody has to read it. You all know that I come on here every week. Like, I know I've missed 2 weeks. But I generally here, sometimes with really nothing, like without preparation. It is imperfect each and every time. And I am finding tremendous value in that because I'm giving myself a deadline. I am practicing. I am stepping up to the challenge of just doing. So that's what I want to do this coming month for November. My goal is to write 3,000 words a day, which I am thinking will take me about 2 hours of writing per day. I have a couple of things scheduled this month that's going to make that difficult. But if I hit 3,000 words a day, if my math is correct, that should get me at a 90,000 word novel, which is nearly double of my NaNoWriMo goal of 50,000 words. So if I slip up, you know, on the day of my grandmother's funeral, I don't get all my words in, I feel like there's a little bit of wiggle room there. I hope so. Anyway, I have tried to do NaNoWriMo twice before. Once was like, I really wanted to do it. I had first found out about it, and then I did nothing. And didn't have an idea, didn't whatever. The last time I tried to do it, it was about a book that I've been wanting to write for several years. I have still not written the book. I've written short stories on it. I've done lots of writing around it. Um, I've just never actually read it. And I did write kind of the beginning, the outset of the book. So I'm going to read you some of that. I haven't reread it in like over a year, probably 2 years, because it was 2 years ago that I wrote it. And I don't think I've reread it. I did probably like 3 or 4 days of NaNoWriMo the last time I tried, which was, more than 100% better of what I did the year before. And so let's see what I can do this year. And my plan is to read an excerpt of whatever I had written, either my favorite excerpt, the whole thing that I had written. I don't really know what it's going to be. I imagine that if it's 3,000 words a day, then that's 21,000 words. I don't think I'm going to read that all to you every Friday night, but maybe I'll read you my favorite part or something. I don't know, a chapter, something. And that will be kind of my imposed shorter deadlines. So I have the whole month, then I have the each day, and then this is kind of that interim of like, I have to show somebody what I'm doing. So I'm going to show you. So I'm really excited for that for the coming November weeks. I really hope I okay. I hope that you guys like what I write. But if you don't, that's okay. I hope that I like what I write. But if I don't, I just want to keep writing. Even if it's the worst thing anybody has ever written in the history of time, I want to just finish something. Just to know I can finish. Because if I know I can finish, then maybe I will believe that I can eventually commit to doing something worthwhile in a longer form. Okay, so you guys may have heard me read a short story before called Washing the Lions. This is based on the same character and the same idea. And it is called Wagon Band. And I'm going to start just by like the chapter 1 sort of first draft that I have. This is intended to be a YA novel. And from the outset, it like took its own kind of course and like was a bunch of stuff I didn't really plan to write. So again, I don't even remember what it is, but we're going to discover it together. So here we go with Wagon Band Chapter 1, Midnight. Midnight had nearly arrived. There is a stillness at midnight that makes big feelings small enough to fit gently into the palm of the hand. Move slowly and use soft hands, for they are delicate, these feelings. But at midnight, they aren't too big to handle. Ruby had to wait for midnight. As it approached, she prepared for it, careful not to attempt to handle the biggest of her feelings before she had midnight to help her with the weight of it. Maybe, Ruby wondered, if she had a feeling that had grown big, even this big, over a longer time, then she could manage it at any hour, day or night. If she'd had a chance to practice with it when it was smaller, when she could see the whole of it at once without moving her head, then maybe she could have trained it to do as she asked. Not many of her feelings were so large. Ruby had plenty of more modestly sized feelings. She was comfortable with feelings she could reason with. Ruby's mother had told her once that feelings you can reason with are a lot like paintings that you can describe in words. They may be pretty enough, but they're totally missing the point. Actually, Ruby remembered that in reverse. What her mother had really told her is that what paintings that you can describe in words are a lot like feelings you can reason with. Ruby was thumbing through a book on artistic theory at the time. At the end of each section of the book provided a list of exercise and questions to apply what was to have been learned in that section. One of the exercises was to choose a painting at random and then describe it, capturing it using the fewest number of words possible. Ruby shut the book and flipped it open somewhere in the middle to a page with an abstract work in predominantly warm colors with a streak of pale minty green off to one edge. Ruby took out a notebook and a well sharpened pencil and started to brainstorm. First, she described absolutely every detail of the shapes and colors in the painting, then began to work at paring it down to fewer and fewer words. She slashed away what was unnecessary. She replaced linking words with punctuation whenever it fit. She replaced very bright and saturated red color with reddest and upward angled diminishing stripe of light pastel green color to minty swoosh. She edited and reduced, omitted and shortened. In the end, she had 10 words. Proudly, she showed the exercise and the randomly selected painting to her mother and bragged that she had managed to describe the entirety of the painting in only 10 words. But Ruby's mother, true to form, glanced at the sample painting for all of 15 seconds before her eyes flashed for a moment, and then, with a slight shrug of her shoulders, she sighed, "I would just call it Alone Amongst Friends." Ruby deflated a little. Just a little. Because of course that summed it up exactly. In only 3 words, with a moment of effort, if one could even call it effort. Ruby's mother had a way of doing that. She had a gift for exactness in her communication in almost all cases, save for maybe one. Soon, Ruby would be confronted with the most important piece of communication from her mother. And oh, how she wished it could have been shaped by the typical exactness of everything else. Only it was not. Not remotely. Ruby couldn't exactly put her finger on what made this piece so approximate. But she couldn't put too much thought into it yet. She needed to wait until midnight. Until then, she would have to accept certain conclusions without investigation. She would have to accept the enormity of her feelings she could not rein in, and then that somehow, however painful their bigness was, that somehow they were not missing the point. She would have to suspend her doubt that there was even that there was she would have to suspend her doubt that there even was a point at all. Not forever, just until midnight. Midnight was coming. Ruby spread her mother's red and black pashmina, the one that looked like a sunburned giraffe, on the floor of her bedroom in front of the tall mirror behind her door. She lit a candle. The candle was wide and short, about the size of a can of Coke, and it smelled like Christmas. Ruby switched on the noise machine that sat next to her bed and turned the dial until she could hear the sounds of a rainstorm. She turned the volume very low. Sounds cut through midnight like a sharp blade. Finally, Ruby reached far under her bed to the deepest corner and retrieved a small box. She placed the box in the center of the sunburned giraffe in front of the tall mirror. Then she flicked off the lights so that only the glow from the candle challenged the darkness. Ruby sat behind her box in front of the mirror. She waited. In a few moments, midnight would arrive and she could begin. Chapter 2: The Goodbye Letter. Ruby sat cross-legged and motionless, with her eyes shut gently, waiting. She needed no clock nor any alarm. As soon as midnight arrived, she would know it. It would announce itself more plainly than any breathing visitor by blanketing the whole of time and the world under its cloak of hush. In other homes, well beyond the reach of Ruby's ear, the clock struck 12. Ruby's eyes snapped open. The glow of the candle tapped her shoulders shyly, and her eyes softened to invite more glow inside. Ruby sat cross-legged and motionless, waiting. Only now she felt as though she, meaning the core of her being, were hovering an eighth of an inch above her body. She was lifted. Her movements were slow, but they seemed to exist in between seconds of time. She looked down and saw hands. They were her hands, but in a sense they were a stranger's hands. Midnight being a costume worn by hands that needed to reach forward and grab a thing that might have been too sharp for hands belonging to a young girl. The hands dropped to a lap. Eyes fell on the box. Breath filled lungs without making a sound. The right hand reached forward, fingertips touched the smooth shape of the rough texture, sliding across the cardboard with the slightest whoosh until they spread around the rectangle and wrapped themselves around it. Breath noiselessly abandons the lungs. A right hand pulled the box slowly, inching forward until it bumped a knee. The box stopped. Lungs are left alone again. Right hand met right knee. Breath filled lungs. Silently again. Left hand lifts, reach out towards the box and rest delicately on top. Left hand strokes the cardboard lid as breath composes a farewell dance. Left hand pauses. Breath fills lungs. Left hand lifts the lid. Breathe out, breathe in, breath out. Nestled in the bottom of the box, sadly crumpled in one corner, a single sheet of blue-lined paper mopes. The thin black ink loops with precision, forming shapely words that breaks a young girl's heart every night at midnight. Perhaps had Ruby grown up learning in school instead of being homeschooled, if her circle of peers were wider and more diverse, perhaps then the mere fact that she had words would have helped keep together the heart that the words themselves cracked. Many kids her age don't get a goodbye letter. Some need to rely on their still developing memory to capture a snapshot of a goodbye, a memory that can warp with wishes and fade into forgetting. Some don't get a goodbye at all. Ruby gets to revisit her goodbye, consider it, study it, analyze it. She can, at midnight, immerse herself in the grief and the confusion, arguing against words that will never concede. It is both torturous and cathartic. And had she been given the option, it is likely that Ruby would have preferred having the letter over not having it. Her mother knew this. Of course she knew it. Ruby's mother knew Ruby entirely. But although she knew that Ruby would opt to have the letter, her mother would have left it regardless of what Ruby wanted. Part of what made Ruby's relationship to her mother grow so close is that while her mother always considered Ruby, she equally considered herself. She balanced Ruby's needs with her own needs and Ruby's desires with her own. Some women can be sectioned off by motherhood, and some of the pieces are ignored for so long they get lost. There are so many tales of a mother rediscovering the passion of her youth after her children are grown up and out of the house. And this is happy news that these pieces are not always lost forever. Sad, though, that so many children grow up watching a role model be only one piece of herself. Ruby finishes the blue lined loose leaf, or Ruby fishes the blue lined loose leaf from the deep of the box and folds it open and smooths the page. Midnight is such a magical time. Indeed, it is the only time that Ruby can read the goodbye letter. During the daylight hours, the letter meant too little. Dearest dear, it is all too much, even my love. You will undoubtedly remember all the things about me that I wish you would forget. But at the tippy top of your memory pile, remember to be the you that I grew. True, truly loved by me first, and then by you forever again. True enough to find a true friend, true enough to be a true friend. Your heart holds everything in it, if your hand can hold a hand in friendship. It was the kind of poem that Ruby always struggled with, the kind that sounded deep, but when you got right down to it, didn't make any sense. Maybe Ruby would have grasped it better if it wasn't the goodbye letter. Maybe if it were simply an innocuous lesson um, maybe if it were simply an innocuous lesson amongst 1,000 others, she could give it its due. But at all times, except midnight, Ruby could hardly fight her overwhelming desire to crumple up the single sheet containing every word her mother wanted to leave her with and toss it into the nearest flame. Chapter 3. Before she went away. Ruby's universe had always been relatively small. It didn't feel small. It felt, as a teenager's life always feels, like it reached the edges of everything and that beyond its borders couldn't possibly be anything more. Ruby lived in Grand Prairie, Alberta, a small Canadian city where she had discovered many little pockets of community. She visited the library every week and chatted with the staff and some of the regular patrons. She often would take a quick field trip across the hall to the art gallery, where there was a whole new smattering of regulars and employees. This group loved images, where at the library they loved words. So to Ruby, they seemed like totally separate camps with only herself to connect them. Ruby didn't know anyone who didn't love art, except maybe her father. Ruby's mother was an artist. Once upon a time, so Ruby was told, her mother was a painter and an actress and a poet and a singer. Ruby had never seen her do any of these things lately. But whenever someone asked her mother, "What do you do?" she would always tell them proudly that she is an artist. Ruby asked her mother at one time why she never got to see any of her mother's art. And her mother sighed longingly and told her that since the day Ruby was born, she was transformed from a painter, actress, poet, singer to a mother. Being a great mother, she assured Ruby, requires as much dedication and creativity as all those other things combined, and she couldn't be a great mother if she were spilling her creative juices all over pages and stages. Her mother would tell Ruby how proud she was to have committed herself wholly to parenting, though that confused Ruby. If mother is so proud to be a mother, why does she keep telling everyone she's an artist? Ruby worried that perhaps her mother wasn't quite as proud as she proclaimed, and that it was Ruby's fault that her mother wasn't painting or acting or writing or singing anymore. Of course, that was simply not true. The deferral of new artistic creations had very little to do with Ruby. Just as before Ruby was born, Mrs. Marks's newfound role of wife was not the culprit in dampening her creative flow. It had never been schoolwork or family obligations or the need to pay rent that stopped Mrs. Marks from her art. Artists all over the world juggle identical obligations, and one lesson the Mrs. Marks had mastered early on was how to prioritize herself. She used many excuses for why she was not actively creating art, but the only thing that was really stopping her was fear. From an early age, Crystal Shields, who would later marry Kurt Marks, developed a keen interest in all disciplines of art. She would experiment with pottery, painting, poetry, performance, and any artistic endeavor she had the opportunity to try out. The pattern of her interest was always the same. She would immerse herself completely, but for a very brief time, giving her some experience with all of it, but no opportunity at all to develop real skills. Crystal delighted in the initial exploration, and no one could deny her creative mind and natural talent. Talent alone, however, can only take a person to the very beginning. Developing technique, honing skills, trying to become good at any art, indeed, anything, requires practice. And in practice, there was always some failure. Some people manage to find meaning and even joy in failures, while Crystal has never found it to be anything but humiliating. That is why she could never really make it past the beginning. Luckily, there was always another discipline to enamor her and distract her far away from the scary middle. It follows logically that avoiding the middle bit meant that Crystal could never make it to the truly satisfying end, the full stop at the end of an artistic phrase. Many may wonder how she managed to maintain her interest without ever experiencing art's greatest reward. The answer is frightfully simple. Crystal, like so many aspiring persons who have paired a piece of their identity to an interest instead of an expertise, imagines the payoff so clearly that she knows exactly how it will feel. She knows that it will feel she knows what it will feel like to show her paintings in a gallery, or have a book of poetry published, or to hear her song played on the radio. Her imagination is bloody powerful, almost as powerful as her fear. She has called herself an artist for such a long time that failing would mean losing herself. What if she could never make it past the middle failure part? What if hours of practice only resulted in learning that she doesn't have what it takes? What if it turns out that she can't actually create anything worthwhile? Who would she be then? Rather than fulfill her presupposed destiny, Crystal found all the reasons why she could not create art. She even tried redefining art so that what she happened to do day by day would count. Occasionally, a thought would float through to the effect that if Crystal spent only as much energy creating art pieces as she spent creating excuses, she would be substantially closer to truly being an artist than she was now. They say that opposites attract, and that is a conclusion you might most certainly come to if you were to look at Ruby's mother and father side by side. Her mother was long and elegant. Her fingers floated out from her hands as her arms did from her shoulders. Ruby's mother was all light and laughter and melody. Her father next to her looked deflated. He wasn't 40 yet, but he had already lost more most of the hair on the top of his head. His eyes were often drooped, followed by the corners of his mouth. With the effort it seemed to take him to smile, he could have been hoisting a car above his head. Still, he did smile, however difficult it seemed for him. When he would pull himself through the door at the end of his day and his wife bounded into his arms and wrapped herself around his neck, he would smile. His eyes would even get a little shine to them. The image would always call a memory to mind when she was very small, curled up on her daddy's lap, and he was telling her a story about the pirate and a mermaid. He felt so close. As Ruby had grown older, it seemed that a distance had also grown between herself and her father. She doesn't know how or why it grew, only that she misses feeling close. Mr. Marks is a software rep for some program that Ruby can never remember the name of. He travels away from home quite a bit, and when he is home, Ruby doesn't usually want to hear about his work. She prefers to talk about herself, since she is more than just a little resentful that he is away so often. She spends nearly every waking minute with her mom and sometimes wishes that her father liked her enough to spend that much time with her. It is pretty easy to keep the conversation on Ruby when father is home, as he doesn't say too much and she fills the time talking about new things that she's learning about and updating him on her extracurricular activities. Ruby has been homeschooled by her mother since she first started school. While other kids are working hard to master the alphabet, Ruby was allowed to indulge herself in topics that she truly wanted to know more about, partly because her mastery of the alphabet came early, and partly because in a class of 30 kids, the teacher has to create a curriculum that can accommodate a wide variety of needs. She is an eager student and enjoys recounting her lessons for her dad to really hammer them in. She is especially interested in women's history and recounts stories ad nauseum about the women's rights movement. Ruby often thinks of her mother in terms of her role as a woman in society, and this often leaves her father in the role of an oppressor. Just his being just his being makes him so in Ruby's mind. That's all I have. I thought I was just going to read the first chapter, but I read the three that I wrote during that brief stint where it looks like I barely got over 3,000 words, if that at all. It says like 4,000 something in my word count on the document that I was working on, but I also had like notes everywhere of other stuff. So it probably was about like one day's work. So yeah, I don't know that I'll be able to recount 7 days work for you guys every week, but I'll be able to read an excerpt anyway. Tell you how it's going. Maybe I'll be able to do the whole week's work if I'm really struggling. I appreciate any feedback if you have any. I am going to finish anyway. So hopefully you can encourage me with positive feedback and help me with constructive feedback and maybe try not to demoralize me with negative feedback. Or maybe that's just what I need. I am a person who is has gotten lots and lots of positive reinforcement over the years. And maybe that's why I've never finished anything, because it's not as good as I feel like I should be. Yeah, I guess I was maybe working through these same ideas 2 years ago when I was writing that, and then put that all onto that character of Crystal Marks, nay, Shields. So that's interesting. This book that I'm going to be writing next year is completely different than that. It's not those characters. I actually care too much, I think, about Ruby and her story, even though I made it up, to use it as a first. Like, I just am too critical of it. I have too many hopes and dreams for it, and I need to get one under my belt first. So I'll be introducing you to those characters next week, because I will be starting this journey on Monday. So wish me luck. Thank you very much for joining me today, and have a lovely Halloween, a happy weekend. I'll see you in a week. Bye-bye.
We need a theme song, so could you please send me a theme song? 'Cause we don't really have a theme song, and we could really use a theme song. Send us a song.